for confusing the facts and muddling the waters to devastating effect. These defendants knowingly directed, conducted, and funded a campaign to deceive and defraud Minnesotans and Americans about the facts, to make facts in science seem controversial when they really weren't. They deceived Minnesotans about the dominant role of fossil fuels in causing climate change in an effort to keep their profits flowing, no matter who it may harm. We're holding some of the authors of that campaign of climate deception, specifically ExxonMobil and 3 entities owned by Koch Industries and the American Petroleum Institute, accountable. Earlier today, my office filed a consumer protection lawsuit against 3 defendants. We're here suing these 3 entities specifically because they designed, conducted, funded this campaign of deception, then carried it out in Minnesota in violation of the laws of Minnesota. We're seeking to hold them accountable for the following things: deliberately undermining the science of climate change, purposefully downplaying the role that buying and consuming their product played in causing climate change and its potentially catastrophic consequences, and for failing to fully inform consumers and the public of what they already knew, that without swift action, it would be too late to ward off devastation. These defendants had a duty to disclose what they knew to the public because it was not otherwise known or available to the general public. But moreover, worse than that, they had a duty to disclose it in a way that was not misleading. They didn't just not tell the truth, they actually misled. Our lawsuit shows, and we will prove, that they knew as early as the 1950s that carbon dioxide from fossil fuels was dramatically heating up the environment with potentially catastrophic consequences. Year after year, more and more research confirmed that very finding. But they didn't disclose it to the public. What do they do instead? Instead, they engaged in a campaign of deception. And for 30 years, the defendants made misleading statements about climate change, the relationship between climate change and their fossil fuel products, and the urgency of the problem. For 30 years, they lied, deceived, muddled facts, and created a false controversy where there really wasn't one. I just want to give you an example. You have an image of this internal ExxonMobil engineering document. Here it is. We'll hold it up for you. It's marked as proprietary information, meaning only for them to know. Dated October 19, 1979. 79. It clearly asserts the reality of climate change and acknowledges that the cause is, quote, due to fossil fuel consumption, unquote. You also have an image of these print advertisements from the Information Council for the Environment, an industry front group dedicated to denying the science of climate change. The ads compare predictions of climate change to, quote unquote, Chicken Little. And they assert that, quote, that may or may not be true, despite the fact that defendants know absolutely that these things were true, and so they try to confuse the public. Doomsday is canceled again. Who told you the Earth was warming, Chicken Little? The most serious problem with catastrophic global warming is it may not be true. And they knew these things not to be true. It's a simple and stark illustration of the climate deception that they engaged in. Misleading statements like these over the period of 3 decades were part of a conspiracy by the defendants to defraud Minnesota consumers and the general public about climate change and the role of fossil fuel products in climate change. Now, I'd like to ask Special Assistant Attorney General Lee Curry to walk you through specifics about our allegations and remedies we're seeking. Lee?
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. My name is Lee Curry, L-E And with this action, Minnesota is joining a growing list of governments from around the country that are seeking to hold companies responsible for misleading the public about climate change in order to protect their bottom line. The complaint that we filed this morning includes counts for fraud, misrepresentation, and negligent and strict liability for failure to warn consumers about a dangerous product. The complaint also includes counts for violating 3 specific Minnesota statutes. The complaint alleges that defendants violated our Protection Against Consumer Fraud Act and our prohibitions against deceptive trade practices and false statements in advertising. Simply put, Minnesota law does not allow companies to make misleading statements in connection with the sale of merchandise. Defendants violated Minnesota law by making misleading statements about climate change in order to continue the unabated sales of fossil fuels. Minnesota's legislature created some of the strongest consumer protection laws in the entire country, and it's Attorney General Ellison's job to enforce those laws. It's his job to make sure that companies that choose to do business in Minnesota abide by Minnesota laws. The complaint seeks restitution on behalf of Minnesotans that were harmed by defendants' illegal acts. Attorney General Ellison is asking the court to require that these companies disgorge the illegally obtained profits and fund a corrective public education campaign about climate change. In addition, the complaint seeks an injunction against any further deception related to climate change and the release of all climate change-related research. This complaint does not seek to hold these companies accountable for climate change. It seeks to hold them accountable for violating Minnesota's consumer protection laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And I also would like to acknowledge the excellent work of Pete Serto and Lee Curry. So Pete, thank you as well. Lee, thank you. While it may sound new to hold fossil fuel companies accountable in court for illegal behavior, Minnesota has a long time and an honored tradition of holding bad corporate actors responsible, and a tradition of winning at that. And so, actually, I wanted to have change. I'd like to first invite up. Mr. Martin, who has to go to. Mr. Martin is a farmer in Byron, Minnesota. He helps us to have food, and he and his work has encountered some difficulties in the course of his action to produce that. And if I may say so, he's here with his son, and this is a farm that's been in his family for I think 7 generations, and he wants it to be 8, and yet he's concerned. Mr. Martin.
My name is Martin Larson, spelled M-A-R-T-I-N-L-A-R-S-E-N. As Keith said, I'm a farmer in Minnesota. It was born into me, as they say, or it was in my blood. I was born into it. I live just outside of Rochester, Minnesota, and depending on which family you pick, it's 5 and 6 generations for me, and as Keith said, my son is generation number 7. So I live where my family settled that land, and indigenous people owned it before us, before my family. And I share that connection with that land and that care of that land and what comes from it. And I'm a corn and soybean farmer, a modern corn and soybean farmer, a little bit of livestock. But I've watched in the last 10 years, like all farmers, no one watches the weather like farmers do. I do also. And if a storm's moving in, you'll find us peering out the windows, hoping it won't be a hailstorm or windstorm or flood. And in that last 10 years, I've seen these scars appear on my farm from the increased rainfall, the short duration, high intense rainfalls. And those scars on my farm and my family's land were like scars on me and that connection with me. So I think that it's important that me as a farmer be here and support activities and be at the table that help climate resiliency, help address climate change, because that's where my livelihood comes from, the weather and the climate. And it's very important to me, and we can play a role in helping solve climate change in the ways that I've changed my farming practices to be resilient to weather and to reduce tillage, to increase cover crops and cover that ground. Well, that's also what we need to sequester carbon. So I'm happy to be here and happy to be at the table and contribute in any way that I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, bro.
And now, let me invite Mr. Doug Blanky. He's the director of the Public Health Center at William Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. Before that, he was the head of the Consumer Protection Division at the Minnesota Attorney General's Office, where he worked on successful landmark tobacco litigation under Attorney General Keith Ellison. Thank you very much.
Good morning. As General Ellison said, my name is Doug Blanke, B-L-A-N-K-E, and I'm here today because this historic action is meaningful to me in three distinct ways. First, I'm the director of the Public Health Law Center at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. Climate change may very well be the greatest of all our public health challenges. And because it falls most heavily on people who are Black, indigenous, and people of color, and people of low incomes, it connects directly to the mission of our center, which is to improve the health of vulnerable populations, because everyone deserves to be healthy. I'm here for a second reason, because as the Attorney General said, before I became a public health attorney, I had the great privilege of spending 20 years of my career in the Attorney General's office under two great champions of both health and justice, former Attorney General Skip Humphrey and his predecessor, Attorney General Warren Spence. During much of that time, I led the Consumer Protection Division, enforcing the same Minnesota laws that are the basis for this landmark case, including enforcing those laws against the lies of the tobacco industry. Lies that echo through every page of today's lawsuit, because the alleged actions of these defendants are ripped straight from the playbook of the tobacco industry. It's from that vantage point that I am confident that this case is legally sound, because Minnesota's consumer protection laws are broad and flexible and strong. They are up to this job. And finally, on a personal note, I'm here today because I chose to move to Minnesota long ago for a very specific reason. Minnesota was a state that worked, a state where people of goodwill from every political perspective rolled up their sleeves and found common cause in solving our hardest problems. A state that was not afraid to lead when Washington failed. A state that stepped up when Washington ran away. With actions like this filing today, I am prouder than ever to be a Minnesotan. Like the tobacco lawsuit, this case is bold. It is audacious. Like the tobacco lawsuit, it rests on a solid legal foundation, but it tests the limits of the law. Will it succeed? Well, the hard truth, as every lawyer knows, is that in cutting-edge litigation, there are no guarantees. That's what makes this courageous. This is what leadership looks like. And for that, I want to say thank you, Attorney General.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so now, I'd like to have a group of Minnesotans to come up to share with you their perspective on why this is an important lawsuit. Minnesota has been harmed by these defendants' 30-year-long climate deception campaign, whether it involved extreme weather events, including increasing stretches of extreme heat, increased exposure to disease-carrying insects and pests, higher rates of asthma due to climate change, which especially hurt people in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, farmers, just heard from Martin Larson, whole communities in different parts of our state grappling with either floods or drought in the same year, and many other dramatic effects on our ecosystems, harmful and costly effects to our infrastructure, bridges, roads, sewers, and the dramatic costs of planning for all these harms and more. And so to help really drive home the point, I've asked first my good friend of many years, the Executive Director of MN 350, Mr. Sam Grant.
Good morning. My name is Sam Grant, SAMGRANT. I am the Executive Director of Minnesota 350, and I am honored to be here to support this very important consumer protection lawsuit that Attorney General Ellison's office is bringing against these three major corporations. And part of what I want to do is set some context. We have a choice between freedom to profit over freedom to breathe. It ought to be a no-brainer that the freedom to breathe must come first, because we have to live in order for anything else to happen. To be in a black body in the United States of America that has privileged the freedom to profit over the freedom to breathe, over the freedom of self-determination throughout the history of African American people in this country, of African people in the world, is something that is a longer context, a longer arc of justice that we have to work for. But working on corporate responsibility, corporate accountability, is a 0 point in this conversation about promoting a future on the planet where all of us can breathe, where all of us can thrive. When we think about the work of these three companies, it's important to contextualize it from an environmental justice perspective. If you live in North Minneapolis, you live 11 or more years less long. Part of that lower lifespan is because of what people call the social determinants of health. Hidden underneath what we call the social determinants of health is a decision process we've consistently reinforced in society that reinforces privileges for these corporations to continue to burn greenhouse gases, even though they've had the evidence for a long time. At the beginning of the significant thrust of the civil rights movement in the 1950s, American Petroleum Institute received a report from a physicist who said, this is going to cause significant climate disruption, and you guys should change your behavior and do something responsible. In 1968, the same year that Martin Luther King Jr. went to speak in Memphis and talked in terms of the garbage workers strike, they received a second report, which was very clearly delineating in 1968 from Stanford Research that said, these are the consequences that are coming from the continued burning of greenhouse gases. As Attorney General Ellison said, he got another report in 1979 saying the same thing. In 1988, we formed the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We said very clearly, we have to stop. Even with all of that information in the advancing science, it is true that throughout the history of the American Petroleum Institute and Koch Industries and Exxon, they have continued to choose to do what makes money over what supports well-being on Mother Earth. We have to encourage them to take some accountability for that. So I just want to talk briefly about some of the specific forms of harm that are happening in some of the communities of color that are impacted by this here in the United States. Think about George Floyd and his statement, I can't breathe. That statement of I can't breathe is matched by a pattern of air inequality where we can't breathe as well. We have 11 toxic companies in North Minneapolis that are putting stuff in the air, soil, and water, and we live less long. We send our children to the hospital, at a much higher rate. African Americans have 3 times the rate of asthma here in the United States. The heat island effects caused by global warming are having a much greater impact. You remember just a week ago, we had those 3 days of 90-degree-plus weather. Well, think about the families living in substandard housing. We live in substandard housing because of the intersectionality of the climate harm caused by these companies related to the economic injustice caused by these companies. The natural oil and gas industries historically have been poor employers of people from communities of color. So not only are we not getting opportunities to equally participate in the burning of the fossil fuels, we're more impacted by the consequences of the burning of the fossil fuels. So we're facing two forms of inhospitality. One, economic injustice prevents us from having fair opportunity in the first place. And second, environmental injustice makes us die at a higher clip because of these harms. So we have to hold these companies accountable to stop deceiving the public, to stop distorting the science, to stop choosing profit over well-being. Let's applaud companies that are making a commitment to deep corporate responsibility, and let's have that be the new pathway. And let's have these three companies say, mea culpa, we're wrong, let's make amends, and let's begin to do the right thing. We need to have in the 21st century, over the next 10 years in particular, a commitment by anybody who wants to, run a business in the United States of America. It has to be a business that serves a bottom line that says, I'm going to run my business in a way that takes care of the earth, I'm going to run my business in a way that takes care of people, and I'm going to run my business in a way that thinks 100 years out, as my friend Winona LaDuke has taught me, and thinking about multiple generations of time spans, and go towards an economy where there is no waste, where there is no pollution. That's what we need to fight for. And I want to see Koch and Exxon and American Petroleum Institute not only apologize, but I want to see them say, let this be the moment where we begin to do business differently. That's the minimum expectation that we have with the African American community and all of our life opportunities here. So I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. And now, a voice from the youth. Let me invite us to talk with you, Juaria. Juaria John. Juaria, you're up.
Hi everyone, my name is Juaria Jama, Juwaria and I'm a 16-year-old environmental justice organizer and lead for the Minnesota Youth Climate Strike. Today I'm here not only to represent the youth of Minnesota, but youth across the globe that have already begun to see the effects of climate change. When we talk about climate change, it is important to note that it is more than just a one-issue topic. It is an intersection of gender, socioeconomics, and race that play huge roles in the environmental inequities we see today. It is without a doubt that corporations like ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, and the American Petroleum Institute, and countless others weaponize race to their advantage by infringing on native rights and low-income communities to build their pipelines and get their oil. These corporations are actively stealing and destroying land and this generation's future, having no regard for the culture and impacts they leave. Because of their deception, as teenagers, we are spending our time fighting for a future that could be stolen from us. Every summer seems hotter than last. Every year there's a new set of hurricanes and superstorms that are only supposed to come every 100 years. We know that irreversible damage has been done. We cannot give back the lives that have already been lost. But we continue to spend our time fighting a last-minute battle to preserve a livable world for myself and the generations to come. Yet, the most heartbreaking thing about all of this is that it could have been prevented. These corporations knew the impacts of climate change long before. They could have sounded the alarm and began working towards solutions. Instead, they decided to deceive the public. They knew exactly what was happening, and instead of making choices to repair our planet, they covered up the damage. Instead of allowing experts to craft solutions, they hid the problem. I'm here today because these corporations have gone far too long without ever being held accountable for the damages they have caused to our globe and our future. What is being done today is what we needed to have been done a long time ago. It is about time that Exxon, Koch Industries, and the API get held accountable for deceiving the public and damaging damaging the public and choosing profit over people. Thank you.
And now, let me introduce somebody who really doesn't need any introduction. Fighter for clean air, clean water, clean land, the rights, human dignity. What else will do?
We try to do a press conference with a mask before. Hi, my name is Maganajuk. Winona, W-I-N-O-N-A-L-A, capital D-U-K-E. Anishinaabe from the Wider Preservation. I'm the director of On the Earth, but I'm also a wild ricer. I come from maybe 10,000 years of ricers, about the same amount of gardeners in our area. I'm a farmer in the North Country, and I'm really proud to stand here with my fellow Minnesotans and Attorney General Ellison and thank them for protecting Minnesota, beginning to challenge the lies of oil companies, fossil fuel companies, as they deeply affect our environment. So let me just tell you a little bit about the North. You know, I call it the deep North, in case you're wondering how it is up there. And not so good in some ways, but you know, you couldn't ice fish in the North. I don't know if anybody noticed that. But there was no fishing because there was no ice on the lakes. Or the ice was covered with so much water and snow, you know. So those of us who live off of our land and our water, we had a hard time being able to fish in the North. Those of us who harvest wild rice, which is the majority of our people in the North, that's our sacred food, our most sacred food. And yet, you know, everybody here knows that 70% of the wild rice in Minnesota is already gone because of multinational mining corporations and poor policies. What remains is very little, and we need to keep it. But this last year was a very hard year on a lot of our rice, all across the North Country. Tremendous losses as the aggressive rains, you know, poured over our crops really aggressively and uprooted some of our rice. That's a deep concern to us in the North Country, you know, and they're expecting a 25% increase in these heavy rain events over the next years. That's going to be disastrous to our rice. Our rice is who we are. That is who we are as people. And then last summer, my partner Don Wadle, he was we grow a lot of potatoes. We grow heritage potatoes, not like RDO often. We grow purple potatoes. We grow all kind of cool potatoes. You know, we were bobbing for potatoes last year. I don't think you're supposed to bob for potatoes. But that's what you had to do last year to get your potato crop out up north, you know? And so I understand the other farmers, you know, the concern of this, and how are we supposed to, as people who produce food for our communities, for our families and the rest, to survive. You know, our work is in adaptation. And I think everybody in this room knows that size actually matters in an agricultural food system. That's to say if you're big, you can't change fast. But small farmers, subsistence farmers can often change our crops, change where we locate, change our practices. And so, you know, it's important to be able to support us and to be able to be in the future, you know, feed our future families in the future. You know, it was 100 degrees temperature in the Arctic in Siberia this last couple of weeks, causing a whole bunch of oil tanks to fall into barrels to fall in because they had them nestling on permafrost. The damage to indigenous peoples and to our planet is really rising significantly. And that's why it's so important what the state of Minnesota is doing here, to challenge liars. You shouldn't be able to lie to people. You shouldn't be able to, you know, mistreat us in this way. I want to say most of you know me from our Enbridge battle. You know, I'm a rural development economist. I didn't grow up to want to go fight Enbridge. But this oil pipeline company carries 75% of the tar sands into this country, and it travels through Minnesota. 75% of the tar sands oils that comes to the United States comes through Minnesota, and it's brought to us by Enbridge. Tar sands is the dirtiest oil in the world. The dirtiest oil in the world. Even the Koch brothers divested of their tar sands assets. It's so bad. But I bring that to your attention because that is a significant climate crime that is occurring in Minnesota. And, you know, we have fought this for many reasons to protect our water, but we've also fought this to protect our climate. So this is an invoice that we have issued to the Enbridge Corporation for the charges that will be associated with removing the 170 million metric tons of CO2 that line through Woodward. 170 million metric tons annually of CO2. Now, if we had to pay as Minnesotans for getting that out of our air, that carbon dioxide, let alone worry about how many oil spills that company's going to have, that's a tremendous cost to the people of Minnesota. So the annual cost, we estimate, and we did issue an invoice here, the PUC's decision on issuing a certificate of need for Enbridge, because certainly in this day and age, we don't need a new pipeline. And so we're grateful also to the Attorney General for that. I want to say finally, I spent most of my life fighting dumb ideas. Time to move on. No one would have predicted the changes that we are faced with now as a country and the changes in our own behavior that we have had to undertake. We wouldn't have done that on our own. And here we are at this moment in time where everything in the world that we knew has changed. This is really a time for the state of Minnesota to provide that leadership. I believe it's really time for a just transition. We laid off thousands of people in the Iron Range for dead-end jobs. 100,000 oil workers have been laid off. The tar sands is closing down. I drove out of Minneapolis last week, and it was raining hard, and I worried. I worried that the street was going to flood, because we need infrastructure in Minnesota for climate change, infrastructure that serves people and public health. And so my suggestion is that those who work on the pipelines in the north should really work on pipes and sewers for Minneapolis and Minnesota. That's what we need. And so I'm grateful to be here with my fellow Minnesotans because I know Minnesota's a place where we can get things done. I know Minnesota's a place with courage. We're a practical bunch. To live in the north, you gotta be kind of practical, or you are not gonna survive. And this is our chance, and I'm grateful to be here as the Attorney General of the state, provide some courageous leadership in challenging players, in challenging corporations and their behavior. And I look forward to the future as we begin our just transition in Minnesota, because we need renewable energy. We need local food. We need infrastructure for people, not for wealth.
Well, that's our presentation for today. Happy to entertain any questions for the press. All my fellow speakers are welcome to help me answer some of the questions.
So, Attorney General, was there any consideration of filing this in federal court? Is that something that you might follow up on as a duplicate lawsuit there? Is there any reason to file there?
At this time, we think that the laws of the state of Minnesota prohibiting consumer protection and deception are the right ones. So that's where we're where we want to be.
Hey, Keith,
Mr. Attorney General, how much are you seeking in damages? Will it be in the ballpark or in excess of the $6.5 million and the one that you mentioned?
It will be substantial. Part of the discovery process will be to determine counting up the bill, but it's going to be a lot. But we also want to disgorge their profits and take the unjust profits that they made, and we want them to fund a public education campaign to help the public understand that the lies they told were lies.
Would it be in the ballpark, though? That was 22 years ago.
Certainly could be. Certainly could be. But the process is ongoing, and it will be a substantial amount.
Keith, has any other state tried this before in the outcome? And part two, are any states looking to join Minnesota, your lawsuit in this?
Other states have tried some lawsuits. They've gone on different theories, though. So in New York, they essentially had an investor sort of theory. We have some of the best consumer protection laws in the country, and so we feel very confident in our lawsuit and the theory it rests on. But no, this is not novel. It's been tried, but we believe our chances for success are very high.
The other 15 suits you mentioned, or 15 states that have tried.
Yeah.
How have they been disposed? Are they all pending? Have some been dismissed? Have some won? And are they all on the same sort of consumer protection angle, or do they vary in the types of law?
They vary in theories, so they're not all consumer protection lawsuits. Some have been dismissed, some are pending, and some are ongoing.
What are the defenses that you're preparing that they'll bring to the case? What are you preparing to argue against that they're going to suggest is their defense?
Well, they're good at not telling the truth, right? So we expect them to say all kind of things. Wasn't us, we didn't do it. Somebody else did it. We told you. You should have known. You should have already been aware of what we were doing. You were silly to believe us when we did lie to you. No shortage.
How much of a parallel is there to the tobacco lawsuit, which when it was first started back in 1994, was considered pretty far-fetched? I know that there were some parallels drawn, and
But they won, didn't
that's it.
they? Yeah. So I think that there are parallels. We know big tobacco lied, said smoking is not harmful. In fact, they implied it was good for you. Some companies were like, 3 out of 4 doctors smoke pell-mell or whatever. They would try to say it was actually not harmful. And in this situation, the companies that were these defendants knew years ago, like as early as the 50s, the deleterious effects of burning fossil fuels, were well aware, lied about it, deceived, actually orchestrated a whole campaign to try to deceive people. And so we do see some parallels.
Wasn't that in Ramsey County too?
Yeah.
The most famous, lawsuit of this is the Exxon lawsuit in New York, which basically was defrauding investors.
Right.
And Exxon won that. The approach you're taking, why do you think it's, worked? What's different? What's different, but in that case, which failed?
Well, again, as you point out, it was essentially an investor-based lawsuit. This one is a consumer protection. Consumers have a right to be told the truth and not lied to. And our laws are pretty clear on that. I think that might be it. But you got okay. We got somebody from who's not here.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Go right ahead. You're up.
Oh, Leslie, Flint Hills or Koch brothers, Koch Industries, Flint Hills is specifically named here. Of course, they have the largest, and they have a big presence here. Is there anything specifically you could point to that Flint Hills and Koch Industries gave some good examples of Exxon and API, but how about Flint Hills and that in Koch?
Yeah, they were part of the architects of deception. They were part and parcel of the effort to deceive. And they have a substantial footprint here. Let's take some questions from outside.
Yeah, this is a question from E&E News. How long has this suit been in the works? And have you been monitoring the success of similar lawsuits like Massachusetts before your decision to move forward with this complaint?
Yeah, we've been studying very hard. We've looked at every lawsuit, and we're well prepared to move forward. And we've been working on it, I'd say for a while now. But any other questions? Yeah.
Will you take a question on a different topic?
No. We can do it after. Yeah. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank all of our speakers today. I want to definitely thank Martin Larson, who's come from Byron. He's had to run back to take care of his farm stuff. I want to thank my good friend Sam Grant. I call you, I don't know if you got your PhD or not, but I call you Dr. Grant because you're so smart. And I want to thank Duraria, Voice of the Youth. I want to thank Professor Blakey, and I certainly want to thank Winona LaDuke. And I absolutely want to thank the Attorney General's staff, who have been just tremendous. So very proud of you, both Pete and Lee. You guys are the best. We represent that spirit of public interest and advocacy that we hold every day. Thank you all very much.